Okay, there's no drum roll, so we'll get started here. It's a full house. It's a great topic. A lot of experts on the panel. I'm really excited to have the opportunity to learn from everyone today. My name is Kevin Petrie. I'm head of research at Eckerson Group, a boutique research and consulting firm focused on data analytics, and really excited to have the opportunity to speak with some great thought leaders here. I think what we're going to do to have this panel discussion is have folks quickly go across and introduce themselves. I think folks like Zhamak and Cindi and Justin need no introduction because they've already been doing some presentations here. But why don't we give some quick introductions and then we'll kick things off. Zhamak.
Hi everyone, I'm Zhamak. I'm known as the troublemaker, creator of Data Mesh.
I'm Justin Borgman, co-founder and CEO of Starburst. We provide a query engine that allows you to run SQL analytics on your data everywhere, wherever it may be.
I'm Cindi Howson, Chief Data Strategy Officer at ThoughtSpot. We're the modern analytics cloud platform against all your data, wherever it is. I'm also host of the Data Chief podcast. And I have to say, I was here last year. How many of you were here last year? Yes. Remember I said, go Europe, like the first in-person conference post-pandemic. I'm so excited to see it bigger and better than ever.
Right. Hi, everyone. My name is Omar. I'm head of BI and analytics for Roche Diagnostics. I work in Switzerland and glad to be here, taking advantage of the European conference.
Hi, I'm Jules Marshall. I'm Director of Data at the BBC. I'm based in London, and it's the BBC. I'm guessing most people know what that is.
Excellent. Well, welcome everyone. Jules, I think, is the only person here who's not jet-lagged, which is good. So Zhamak, I want to start with you. I thought you gave a great session this morning, and I know a lot of people in the room here have read your book or read your blog or have some familiarity with the data mesh. Why do you think the data mesh has gotten so much attention? And I know that in your discussion you had, I thought, a compelling view of why we're at an inflection point. This particular topic and approach seems to challenge some basic assumptions and inspire somewhat religious debate. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes. I think probably the right moment in time, part of it. What Data Mesh did, it surfaced pain points that were ubiquitously experienced, right? But we had never questioned why that's the case. We were experiencing pain points of scale around centralized data lake or data warehouse, and Data Mesh, I think, just surfaced that resonated. And I think there is a sense of familiarity with Data Mesh, right? We have seen the principles of Data Mesh adopted in digital world with microservices over a decade ago at the point in time that we had to address complexity of software engineering and building bigger and bigger applications with centralized teams. So I think the familiarity of that approach applied to data combined with a shared pain we all experienced might have something to do with it.
That's fair. Cindi, do you have thoughts on this as a former analyst and observer of the industry?
Yeah, analyst, observer, and one-time implementer.
Okay.
So if I go back 25 years, the world's first global data warehouse, when I was working for Dow Chemical in Switzerland. And some of those practices, so Kevin, you used the word religious wars. We are still using 25-year-old technology. Worse, it's 25-year-old mindsets. When at that time we had one global SAP instance. I think about just even in ThoughtSpot, we have probably 20 applications just for marketing. We are capturing more data, creating more data, but as an industry, we're not doing a good job at getting to that data faster. And so the pain point, Zhamak, that you refer to, the customers that I work with, when they talk about how it takes 9 months and 6 or 7 figures of dollars or euros before they get to a usable data set, that is unacceptable at the pace of business for a digital economy. So it's resonating in terms of faster time to insight, but also more relevant data sets because domain owners are working on it.
So Zhamak, I want to come back to you, and then we'll broaden the discussion as well. You gave, I think, pretty good evidence of the rate of adoption of data mesh in enterprise accounts. With that said, we are in early days, and some of the resistance or skepticism is centered on, as you pointed out in your anti-pattern slide, people and process. And I'm curious if you could talk about that more and what advice you have based on some of the early adopters, how you can redefine the people and process necessary to make the data mesh successful.
Sure. Yeah, I think the people and process is a big part of this, and what data mesh tries to do is to remove the last wall within the organizations. And to me, that wall is the wall between app developers, digital teams, people that are building the back-end applications or services, and data people. So some of the anti-patterns that I see is data mesh gets adopted, but people that are enthusiastic about it are the data people. So data mesh gets localized to the data department. So what we end up building is a fairly over-engineered, decentralized solution, yet centrally adopted. So we're not really removing that wall. So then I think the organizations that are successfully adopting data mesh, they're establishing that top-down partnership between business, tech, and data, and that cross-functionality that we want to promote gets promoted from the top. And I think Omar here has an interesting example of that within his organization.
Omar, would you like to share with us?
Yes, I think it's a paradigm shift, as Zhamak calls it. And in order to do that, you need to really partner and open up. You need to get rid of old practices. So take example of what I did, right? So my department, like BI and analytics, have been the traditional bottlenecks. When we started this journey, when I reached out to Zhamak and said, what have you written? We literally had to open up the doors and said, we are stepping back. We need to partner with business and IT, let go of these boundary walls and focus on creating value. And that's the hard part. That's the soft side of the data mesh. And these are the hard things when it comes to implementation of data mesh as well.
So Justin, maybe you could provide us some perspective on what you're seeing from Starburst customers, the degree to which the data mesh is prompting them to rethink how they architect their environments and how they're going about it. At Eckerson Group, we always advise folks to be ambitious with long-term plans, but very conservative with near-term incremental steps. Just curious what your thoughts are based on the customers that you're working with at Starburst.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's essential, especially with something as disruptive, potentially, as the data mesh paradigm, to try to achieve quick wins, so you can demonstrate value and demonstrate that there's viability behind this concept. And so what we tend to focus on with our customers is first providing connectivity to the different data sources that you have, so that now you have connectivity to your decentralized data. And then really focusing on one of the pillars that Zhamak talks about, which is this idea of data products, like thinking about data as a product. And the way that we help facilitate that is by allowing the various different organizations on both sides of the wall that Zhamak spoke about craft data as a product that can span across data sources. So now you've separated where the data is stored and how it's physically organized with the business value that you can derive from it, which I think now unlocks a lot of possibilities. And so we have customers doing this, actually almost 40 now, that are using our data products capability specifically on top of our engine to basically craft these data products to be discovered and ultimately consumed by folks in their organization. And we're getting participation from the domain owners, which to us is like a sign of success. So there's not just the centralized team creating data products, although that's an okay place to start, but really empowering these decentralized teams to contribute and craft their own data products and get feedback on it. How do you like this data product? You can rate them. You can score them. You can interact with the data producer. And I think that creates a more collaborative environment where you're really bridging the gap between the data team and the data domain owners.
So that's very interesting. And Jules, in speaking with you earlier today, I know that you have a long background with data products. Back before it was cool, say a decade or more ago. Perhaps you could share your evolution with the audience and
Well, I think
how that notion of a data product has evolved.
Definitely, and I think everybody in this room has probably been through that evolution. You know, data products back in the day used to be very much around death by dashboard. I think really we kind of think about, you know, that end result of, oh, here's an amazing dashboard, make some decisions. And I think what's been amazing with data mesh and kind of the framework is that it's really opened up that opportunity to start actually thinking about data itself less as an asset but more as a product. And actually thinking about how we manage that data and how we structure that data and utilize that data end to end. And that has been quite revolutionary, I think, to how people actually see data in an organization and therefore how they start to interact with it and utilize it on their day-to-day.
And so talk more about the data mesh approach within the BBC and how the data product fits within that.
So we're very early on our journey.
Okay.
I mean, as well, you know, the BBC is an organisation that's over 100 years old, so it's very cool to be able to kind of come in and kind of look under the hood and kind of see, you know, where is it that we want to get to if we want to be a digital-first BBC. But kind of how we're approaching it really is exactly as kind of Justin and Cindi and Zhamak have talked about. It's about the value, actually really understanding the users, understanding domains and their problems and the decisions that they need to make, and really starting there with them before kind of thinking anything about technology, and then really, you know, reverse engineering that into the principles that mesh kind of brings forward.
That's good. Good. So I encourage folks to respond to one another as well.
Well, I'm
I
also
sense
thinking
Cindi has something
this
to
is
share.
not your first rodeo.
No, no.
So maybe if you're allowed to talk about what you did before too, because you're one of the first in our industry to even have that title.
Yeah, so in my previous role, I worked at Just Eat Takeaway, and we actually had to combine. It was basically about combining legacy platforms. So we were taking one legacy platform, which was literally a data warehouse, Redshift data warehouse, and I think a lot of people in this room will probably be there going, woof. Yeah, global organisation running off just Redshift. That must be interesting. And then on the other side, we had a data lake, and we also had separate partners. So we were working with AWS and with Google. And so there was an interesting challenge there about how do we actually merge those, or how do we actually understand what the organisation needs to be set up for success for the future. And yeah, so actually it was the mesh that really sparked the innovation in the teams, I would say, across technology and across data, which was really exciting, and product, which was brilliant, to really start having those conversations around actually we need domains and we need domain experts who are owning that data and accountable for that data to make sure that it is, you know, structured in the right way, it's of the quality required to drive the organization forward.
So maybe I can add a few things here.
Please.
The data product thinking, or treating data as a product, there is, of course, a school of thought, and you can read about both of them. There is no right or wrong. But that's the heart for me for data mesh implementation. That's where the value generation is taking place. That's where the most effort on change management will be required. Because we have been used to working on projects. We have been working on somebody will deliver something and throw it to ops team. We have been working on, I want a dashboard and that's it, I don't care about data. Or now I want to do some AI, ML, data science thing, and that's the latest trend.
Cool stuff.
Yes, the cool stuff. But it goes back to what outcomes we need to generate, and that's the data domain and the product team defining. And that's what makes the difference. Because based on skill set, capabilities, you have to talk about data literacy, skill building programs. You need to think about what kind of technology choices you may have to make to really bring that data product concept to life, or make the life simple for the data product teams as well. No matter what the scope is, whether it's just the data or an insights part of it or something else.
Yeah, it's got to be the insights, and that's where I think it's a big shift in the industry, that you said throw it over the fence, or thinking of data as an afterthought, collect it, and then talk to the data team. And if we can get to, so we're so grateful for the work that Roche does, the diagnostics, the COVID test kits, and so much more, but where are those test kits? How do we get them faster, cheaper, and how we get to that insight all the way from the analytics back to where we capture it is what we just have to get to that as an industry.
So drilling in on the notion of a data product, at Eckerson Group, we've done a lot of research on data ops, which is essentially a discipline comprising people, process, and technology to deliver timely, accurate data in the form of data products, and it involves a lot of pipelines. And Zhamak, I'm curious, you said something that Cindi and I were talking about after your session this morning, that pipeline and data mesh should not go together in the same sentence. I was hoping you could elaborate on that. The thought I have is that if you need data pipelines in order to create data products and then to share them. The users don't necessarily need to perceive that pipeline, but perhaps you could elaborate.
Sure. I think we use pipeline at two levels. One is this pipeline mindset and pipeline meta-architecture. So we are very much tuned to this idea that data gets generated somewhere. You click on a website, on an e-commerce site, and that generates an event, and that's a piece of data is generated. But for that data to generate value, whether it's an applied machine learning to give personalization recommendations or some sort of an insight about performance of e-commerce, what's happening right now? I'm sure each of you can imagine this pipeline. Well, we have to get that event into some event stream, and then we have to convert it, transform it, aggregate it, and then, of course, we have to put it in a lake or a warehouse. That's not enough. We have to layer it now with metadata. Well, how about governance? Now we have to put policies around it. This is a very pipeline-oriented thinking that creates this long lead time from data to actually applied trained machine learning model in production, making inferences and giving recommendations. So what data mesh tries to do is completely make us reimagine how we go from that data to value, and instead of this macro level pipeline that we generate, to say, in fact, we want to get data to value around these autonomous units of value exchange. We call them data products. Yes, internally they might have a small, localized, local complexity, small complexity pipeline, but we want to create, don't see this view as this pipeline view, see this as independent, autonomous data as a product served with data APIs, whether they're through SQL or other ways of getting to that data. They are interconnected via very simple pipes, not really pipelines, to share the data, create higher order data products, so that e-commerce interaction becomes an independent data product. And internally, for that particular type of data, like e-commerce, user interactions, or personalized information, and so on, yes, there might be a pipeline, but that pipeline is a second-class concern. And whether, even if pipeline is the right method of implementation or is just a serverless function running, it depends on the complexity of implementation, pipeline becomes a second-class implement details. So, that's my view.
Okay, so you could have small pipelines, fewer elaborate pipelines in order to handle the transformation, the common formatting, the creation of the data product within the business unit. Ideally, those would be data engineers that work for business owners. Is that fair to say?
Well, I want to call them data product developers. Again, data engineer brings our focus on the mechanics of, we have to do data engineering, and takes our focus away from, I'm here to deliver an outcome, as opposed to I'm here to write a stage of a pipeline that maybe down the track generates an outcome. So if we see ourselves as data product developers, and part of that job is data modeling for that data product, part of that job is the data pipelining that might be needed, that's all part of the job. And in fact, data engineering as a practice has been implemented as an intermediary in that stream value stream that I think has done perhaps more damage than good. Those skill sets are necessary, but need to be reframed, as data product developers.
Okay, so that's fair. Yeah, please.
Yeah,
Justin.
no, I was just going to add, I think like it's really about pipeline thinking in a way. You know, like there may be a pipeline, there may be not a pipeline, but that's orthogonal. That's kind of irrelevant to, you know, whether or not I can, you know, access my data product, which is really the first-class citizen. And so I think, you know, it's about focus and removing that mindset of like everything has to work in this very linear path, the way that Zhamak described, before it can be analyzed. And I was just going to add, you know, I think like a reason why this matters, particularly for Europe, is you have data privacy constraints and data sovereignty constraints, which actually force decentralization in a way that has never been forced before legislatively. And I think that's really fascinating and probably one of the motivators for why this is so interesting, you know, to the audience here is you can't have these linear pipelines necessarily all the time. Data in Switzerland has to stay in Switzerland, you know, and so how do you interact with that model? How do you accommodate that model? And I think data mesh represents the only opportunity really to think about that model conceptually. You can't get it all into one data warehouse anymore.
Yeah. Cindi, I'll put you on the spot. Do you have thoughts on this as well? I know we're talking
Well,
about it
I'm
earlier.
just kind of chuckling because I'm thinking some people would say, oh yeah, but because we have GDPR and sovereignty issues, no way am I going to trust the business person to get it right? They're going to screw it up. They are the biggest risk, and that's why the central data team has to create this monolithic data warehouse so that they can control it. So I think there's fear about this. So I agree with what you're saying, Justin, on that point, that it helps enable and localize the data. I think the pipelines can be small pipelines. I get excited. I was with a customer yesterday in the north of England, and they used the term an insight analyst. I think that's a better term. And one of our partners, DBT, coined the term the analytics engineer. I think this gives us more hope that it's more about what we're doing with the data than actually just creating this data store. But Justin, you wanted to...
No, I was just going to say that I think you can separate where the data is stored from, you know, how you govern and provide access control. And certainly, at least with many of our customers that are a little further along in their data mesh journey, many are early stages, as you mentioned, but those that are a little further along have decided, you know what, for now anyways, we're going to centralize the access control piece, the security pieces, because that is sensitive, that is important, but we're going to embrace, you know, decentralization in terms of where the data is stored. So if I can centralize access as a single point of access with single point of, you know, fine-grained access controls, but leave my data where it lives, that you know, seems like a comfortable middle ground for right now.
So
on
Omar, please.
Data ops side, I have a lot to say, so I will try to contain my feedback here.
We like the user feedback. So
Yes, and for two reasons. One, what I'm about to say, you can see shameless plug in a talk right after this. So you can see it in more details.
Nothing shameless about that.
Awesome. Data ops is all about doing things. That's where the action is taking place. It is absolute necessary. If you are any size of organization like Roche or even smaller, you have multitudes of technologies for various genuine or historical reasons. You will have different data ingestion tools from coding to classic ETL, ELT type of things. You need to take care of all that metadata. You need to talk about the access controls policies. You need to consider data residency laws. All of this is taking place by that data product team. And you need something that takes care of all that, not just from process point of view, but from technology point of view. Most of the time, people talk about mindset. Oh, let's put dev team and ops team together and voila. Yes, you can do that, and it's required. But just putting them in one room or one virtual room, no matter whether they are part of business or internal or external, will not solve the problem. Whether they are data engineers or software engineer, analytical engineer, you can label them whatever you want. A person writing the code needs to know what is required and how they will do it, how they will experience branching off the data as well as the code to do the development, whether they want to merge it back, whether they want using the pair programming or whether they are practicing something else, doesn't matter. You need to have that flavor, whether they are generating just data products as APIs, or they are doing it via JDBC or DBC connection, whether they have insights through dashboard or nice curated view for augmented analytics,
Dashboard.
for example.
You use the word dashboard.
Of course, we still see data visualized in some way, and guess what? We call it a dashboard. So you need that, right? And we will show you after the session.
So thank you, Omar. And so, Jules, I'd like to get your perspective as someone who has some real runtime with data products. How do you approach the upside and the downside of the data mesh? How's it net out? You're moving that direction, so you think the upside outweighs the downside. But
yeah, I think really it's about having a realistic view on your organization and starting there, because I think as well, you can't just, one day wake up, walk into the office and going, data mesh is the answer. There is no quick fix, there's no silver bullet, but also again, it's very much, there's effort behind moving to this type of, domain-driven architecture. It's a big cultural shift. You're literally asking your organization to fundamentally change how they, see and use data. And I think we've talked a little bit there about, things like governance. Governance is so important. Like really setting up the organization for success, and especially with data mesh, you've really got to have that overarching governance, which is there to ensure that, data is all of the same quality, the same standard, and it's very much creating that semantic interoperability that data mesh enables, because that's really, for me, the upside of data mesh. It's when you're in a big, complex organization that has a lot of data and a lot of silos. It's how do you open that up? And that's what data mesh enables. It's really about creating that openness to data. And yes, zero trust, making sure that people only have access to the data they should have. But really, it's about opening up data and making sure everybody's speaking the same language, because that has been a massive problem that I've seen in multiple organizations, that, people kind of walk into a room and, yes, there might be a dashboard and somebody else might have Excel, and they're both like, well, this is the number I've got, this is the number I've got. They're two different numbers. Okay, why have we got different numbers? And the lineage and the metadata around that data isn't available. And so it takes a lot of man hours to figure out, well, why have we got different numbers? We're supposedly looking at the same thing. And again, that's where, mesh comes into play, because it really focuses on taking ownership and accountability of your data and providing that context, and having to do that to be able to kind of set up your data products that drives that value and really reduces that lead time.
yeah. It's funny, I've viewed the data mesh since first learning about it 4 years ago as, in a sense, inevitable. I was with Attunity, now part of Click, for 5 years, and even in the time since then, so much of what they do is moving data from point A to point B, and so many of the big projects were based on data consolidation onto a single cloud target. But they'd consolidate one place 1 year, they'd consolidate another place another year. So data consolidation is really data distribution in disguise. So kind of acknowledging the reality that environments are distributed and saying, we're not going to change that. Let's figure out how to rationalize what we have given the inevitable distributed environments. Seems to make sense.
It does. I put it through the advanced alien civilization litmus test. If an advanced civilization came to Earth and looked at us, constantly consolidating data from one other place so that we can value out of it, what would they think? They would definitely have a giggle.
I think so too. It's a classic case of a lot of technical debt. Decisions that are good in isolation at a given point in time for a given business unit or project, but collectively they create a real problem.
Yeah, and the technical debt, sadly, we don't get to throw away everything we have built up over 20 years. I like American Express has spoken about this. They have a mission to decommission. They actually incentivize.
Oh, okay.
But this is where I think starting maybe with one new data product and using some of the modern technologies, whether it's Starburst or DBT or ThoughtSpot, whichever, just start with one data product, learn the principles, implement some of the culture and people and process change, and then go back and say, okay, what do we get rid of? But the technical debt, I think, is a huge problem for most organizations.
So we'll open it up here. What advice would you have for enterprises, for folks in the room here who are new to the concept, they've learned enough about it to be dangerous, and now they're trying to figure out if and how it applies to their organization? What sort of guiding principles would you provide? Zhamak, maybe we'll start with you.
Sure. I think this is a transformation. We are early in the process. We haven't figured out all of the details to do this at scale. So I would say, if you're starting today, do an honest self-assessment that it is the right moment for you to start this journey. Are you an organization that has technology at core, can go into the unknown, because there would be corners that you have to explore and figure out? For example, a distributed system of data sharing that enables eventual consistency for machine learning model. Just take that problem statement home. It is a hard problem to solve. So you need to be ready for some of that innovation come in-house, and not necessarily wait to get a solution and integrate. So that tech at core. And you need to have real pain points. I mean, data warehouse and data lake should be a problem. You need to have the complexity that deserves an equally complex solution. And with that, I think attention to engineering disciplines. Distributed systems are really hard. Distributed data systems are even harder. So there is a lot of engineering ingenuity that needs to go into implementations. Like what we talk about, computational governance is a pillar within data mesh, but within that there is so much technical complexity to be able to implement that zero trust architecture for a data system. So go in with open eyes and welcome ambiguity and adventure. But I think it is exciting.
It is an exciting time. Justin, what are your thoughts? Guiding principles.
Yeah, I would just say focus on business value, and start kind of small. Like one of the most common, simplest places a lot of companies can start is thinking about combining finance data with customer behavior data. Maybe it's product data or it's web traffic data and billing data of some kind. And what kinds of business questions can be answered, what kind of new value can be created by simply combining those two sets of data, and start to create data products, around that. And I think like the potential to your earlier question about upside here is like you're able to now unlock the power of your individuals and teams, their own creativity, their own genius, without that central data team being the bottleneck. Like many of us are, distributed systems people. Like there's always a bottleneck in the system, and it's the data team generally, right? And they don't mean to be, but that's just how it works if you have to have this queue of requests. Well, I think data mesh represents the opportunity to decentralize, and I think we've seen many points in history, whether it's how societies are formed or even military doctrine, that the notion of decentralized teams is always superior to central command and control, and I think that's what this represents.
Absolutely.
Start small, but scale fast. And I would also say, don't underestimate the fear of people that have been in the centralized teams or that are afraid of data in the business domains. This is what leads to some of the religious wars or the resistance to change.
I think the best way to describe, based on my experience, is driving the right balance between the things. So whether don't aim for perfection of identifying all the domains or the leaders. Start with somebody who has a real problem, like others have shared. It's very important to do that with the right focus and the right business outcome focused. You cannot buy data mesh yet.
You can't?
Not
Wait,
yet.
I think that's an important point.
You can buy the data mesh book, but not the data mesh itself.
You can go to Starburst booth and get it even for free. You don't have to.
And you see, a lot of technology is out there which can help you. So for example, we are working with Snowflake, DataOps, Collibra, XYZ, ThoughtSpot, etc. We are using all of them, but they are tailored around the principles, what we discussed over here. So nobody is going to tell you, buy this platform and this is it. So that may not happen. And governance, right, Jules, you mentioned.
You're stealing my point.
Yeah, well, that needs to change to data sharing from controlling. You need to bring that love towards the data rather than keeping it locked inside some kind of a jail. So free the data. That's my message to all of you.
All right, and love and govern the data. And Jules, how about you?
Omar stole my thunder there. But yeah, governance, I was going to say, really think about governance up front. It's really important to be understanding where your organization is, how it currently governs and manages data, what policies and processes do you have in place, what compliance procedures do you have, all that fun stuff. It's really, really important. And then I think my main piece of advice really is use your network. So one of the best things you can do is chat to people around, data in different industries, different organizations, and kind of say, hey, I can see you've maybe delved into this. What was this for you? Because there is no one size fits all, as we've kind of said. You have to figure out whether it's right for your organization, and if it is, what does that structure look like? Because it's a framework, and the whole beauty of it really is that it's flexible, and it's about figuring out for your organization, what do you need to drive the most value?
Excellent. So how are we doing on time? We have some more Q&A. We got a 10-minute warning? Okay, so I want to do, we have 10 minutes, thank you very much. So let's do this, we're going to have
12 minutes.
12 minutes, thank you very much. Okay, I'll ask one more question and then we'll do sort of a speed round of predictions. Bear with me. The role of the CDO. This is a good recommendation from Cindi. Let's ask some hard questions about the role of the Chief Data Officer, given the rise of the data mesh. And it sounds like we do have some evidence at Roche. There is not a CDO, correct?
Yep.
There is a data mesh.
Yes.
Perhaps there's correlation. Cindi, do you want to kind of frame this discussion? And I'd love to have Zhamak's thoughts too.
Yeah, I think of the role of the Chief Data Officer. The first generation was about guarding the data and just getting it into a central place so that you could govern it, you could trust it. The second generation CDOs really has to be about delivering business value. So if you have a CDO who is not afraid of their job, they will partner with the businesses to say, how do we create these data products? I'm here to enable you, to help with the upskilling, to make sure we apply some data ops principles and that we don't have a data breach. If you have an old school mindset CDO, they will not want the data mesh because they will see it as a loss of control and a loss of power. So I think in high functioning organizations, it is interesting to me, Capital One, large financial services company in the US, they are on the record of having the first CDO in our industry. They are applying data mesh principles, and they no longer have a CDO. So I don't know if that's a trend. One customer, two customers does not a trend make, but I think we have to watch the power in politics and the evolution of that role.
Yeah, Zhamak, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I agree with Cindi that we're moving away from data ownership and control. CDO perhaps in the interim become an enabler. So we will still have specialties that perhaps people functioning under CDO have, and it's not democratized. Those specialties around, the governance of the data and retention of the data, all of the policies that applies to an organization might be still centralized between subject matter experts that CDO hires and leads. But the role inverts from control of the data to enabler and enabling these autonomous domain-driven teams to use the data, and CDO plays that enabling role.
Very good. Okay, so we'll do a speed round in 45 seconds. we'll have each person make a prediction about where the data mesh will be in 2025. Jules, why don't we start at the end and work this way?
Oh, 2025.
So now no one will take your ammunition. You can start.
I know. 2025 there, you put me on the spot. Ooh, interesting. I think it's going to be more mainstream, if I'm being honest. So I actually think, working in kind of broadcasting and media, big, complex, messy kind of data space, it's great fun. We're seeing more and more organizations jumping on board the train. So I genuinely think in a lot of industries, this is going to be more mainstream.
Okay.
I fully agree with that because I think this will become a norm, especially on the data products, the data as a product thinking side of you. People will start sharing data within the enterprise and specifically outside the enterprises as well, because we don't work in isolation, we work in a community out there. So practices like data mesh provide a solid framework to do that, not just internally, but externally as well. So I hope we see that industry level transformations taking place all across the board. I also foresee there will be the technology, which has been a driver. If you think about it, a lot of things have changed in technology, which has driven a lot of things in data, will make it further easier for us to implement these things. We will have an amazing experience for developers all across the board for different personas. So, and hopefully we will see more data free and not shackled.
There you go. Okay, Cindi.
Okay, I'm always very specific, so I'm going to be a little bold, so I'm a little nervous here, but you gave me till 2025. So by 2025, organizations that are applying data mesh principles will outperform organizations who use a data warehouse-only approach by double digits.
Wow.
And by 30% less cost. And there's research out there to already say we're going in that direction.
Excellent. That's bold. I like that. Justin.
These are all great predictions. I agree with all of them, actually, so far. To be a little bit provocative, I will say, first of all, I agree it'll be more mainstream. And a sign of that will be traditional data warehousing companies that are the antithesis of data mesh will start talking about data mesh. And that will be when you know that the world has changed.
But that's
You
already
can't beat them.
It's already
Yes,
happening.
it is.
It's not
Data
that
mesh
provocative.
washing.
That's what's interesting. Zhamak, you addressed this some in your talk, but please go ahead.
Yeah. I think what I want to happen is that every developer works with data, and the data work is not isolated to a specialist, whether you're an analyst or data scientist. So we will have data developers, and we will have technology that delights the experience of those data developers.
Good. I think these are all great predictions. My prediction is that in 2025, most enterprises will say they have a data mesh, and a fraction of them will be speaking the truth. I think that it will become, unfortunately, an excuse for admitting that they're highly distributed and heterogeneous, and they're trying to rationalize that. I'm not sure they have successful data meshes, but they will say they have a data mesh. Good. So I think we can. Do we have time for questions? We have 5 minutes.
5 minutes.
Okay. Do we have microphones? Here's a microphone and here's a hand.
Hi, thank you very much. Very interesting panel. I have a question actually towards BBC and Roche. One is what was actually your motivation to start your mesh initiative? And the other one is how do you measure your success on the way?
Great question.
You want to go first?
Yeah, I can go first. So like I say, for us, I mean, Zhamak just talked about it. The experience for data professionals right now as well is really, really painful. So for us right now, a key measure of success is really their experience. So actually, how easy is it for them to do their jobs? Because obviously we want to continue down that value chain to users across the organization, and that's the goal, but we're kind of starting there. So our key measure of success really is reducing that lead time from discovery to consumption of data. So lead time from discovery really to insight. So whether that's on iPlayer, you getting a really great personalized recommendation, or that's in news where they need to make real-time decisions, based on what's happening in the world.
So in our case, to first part of your question, when we started this journey, it was the time to decide whether we are doing yet another 15th version of enterprise data lake or 16th version of an enterprise data warehouse or not. And I decided together with my team, it's time to try something different, because repeating the same things will not give us different results. So that was one of the motivations. And the second motivation, how are we measuring that? That's a great question, because before doing any such initiatives, the measure was always been, what is the business case of your big mega program? That needs to go away. The thinking should be focused on what kind of business outcomes am I trying to achieve, and what kind of hypotheses and use cases I have that will lead me towards that. We also learned some practices from literature and some practices like, there are 4 key metrics identified in a book called Accelerate, which talks about how do you measure the organizations which are really outperforming. We started to measure that. Guess what? When we started, we didn't even have a baseline to assess. We tried to figure out that, we might be doing 1 release every 3 months. Now we are doing 120 releases every month.
Wow.
So that might be one success, but it's
good.
not just about the release, it's about the focus on the customer value for patients that we have to generate.
That's great. So let's have another question. I think we have one right here. Hello.
Is it on? Okay.
Yep.
There you go. Omar, I've looked at some of your work, and you guys created like 4 categories: the heart, the mind, the soul. I can't remember the 4th. To help with enablement, and I love the conversation about enablement. From a data governance perspective, that word, how much of that makes you kind of skin crawl or step back a little bit? How important is for us to reframe these in terms like the heart, the mind, the soul, or have an enablement program?
So anybody watches Game of Thrones or have watched? When I hear the word governance, I wish there is a dragon on my shoulder and I can say Dracarys, and then they can burn everybody in front of them. But jokes apart, it's an important thing. You cannot joke about that. But the reason I call the mind of the data mesh, which is also the 4th principle, and Zhamak added the wonderful word of computational governance to it. Thank you for doing that, by the way. It's changed from, again, the protection to more sharing things. The domains can decide and prioritize what business value they need to create. That federated governance body, which represents all of them, needs to come together and start talking about how we are going to share the data with each other. So it's one of the things that you can practice.
That's great. So do we have time for one more, or we're done? Very quick question. Does anyone have a very quick question? There are no quick questions with data mesh. I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
You talked about the 3-year target of 2025. How would you manage to recruit and reskill data engineers to meet those kind of targets? Obviously, a 100-year-old company, BBC, is going to be of a lot of legacy. How are you then going to bring people to modernize? Obviously, people talk about blockchain, they want to talk about this, but
yeah, they do.
in reality, it's not really going to happen, is it?
No. Well, blockchain's an interesting one, but one thing I will say is we are hiring. Definitely. So you do need to scale, but I think exactly what you have to actually look at is you have to assess what skills you need in the organization and how do you best distribute those and create the right teams. So it's not really about individuals, it's about actually how do you start getting that diversity of skills and experience into the organization to start setting it up for success, really. And I think what you have to do is phase it, really, because you can't just go out there and hire hundreds of people, in a week. I mean, I'd love to. That'd be the dream, because hiring takes up a lot of time. But it's very much a case of that you really have to focus again on the value you're trying to drive and actually, break that out. You have to break that out into manageable chunks and kind of go, well, we can't do everything at once. What are we going to focus on? We're going to focus on ingestion. Okay, so what skills do we need? and then you just start to tackle it in that sense. I think one of the things we love to do in the BBC as well is we do a lot of pairing and we do a lot of training and development. And I think that's really key as well. You know, we've had people who have come from editorial join data, and that excites me because they're bringing a different type of expertise to the game.
Excellent.
Sorry,
so I'm going to leave a final note to Zhamak.
If we have to hire data engineers to do data work for data mesh is dead. So we actually don't need data engineers to data mesh. We have to elevate the developer experience, the platform, so that a vanilla developer can do data work. And the problem with a lot of data tooling that we have is optimized for the machine. It's not really optimized for the human experience. So let's work in the next 3 years to fix that.
It'll be a busy 3 years. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, everyone on the panel, for getting me smarter. Thank you, Zhamak, for starting a new industry. And thanks, everyone, for coming.
If you want your book signed, you can come to at 3 p.m. to a book stall. I think it's 7:14. And before that, you can go to Starburst and pick up a free book.